Just moments ago, Wall Street Journal reported that an Iranian missile strike hit an oil tanker carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil near the Strait of Hormuz. Ray, this is the fight that is going on. The two sides trying to dominate the region. One side is the United States. They they removed the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. They still there. They're using the bases in, for example, in Jordan to do these strikes as last night happened. And Iran, which is part of the region, in that region, is the geography of that region that is controlling the strait. And do you think this sort of game that Washington and Iran are playing against each other, who's going to outlast the other side?
Well, that's an easy one, Nima. Thank you for throwing me an easy pitch. Our military leaders and political leaders have myopia. They're nearsighted. They can't see a map unless it's really small scale. Okay. They can't see what West Asia is like, where the Russians are, where all these things are arrayed, and they can't measure the difference between a place like Bahrain and Norfolk. Okay. I mean, hello, it's just so simple. Now, how do you explain that? Well, I asked Larry Wilkerson, my good friend, I said, Larry, aren't there any top military generals that will say, well, look, here, it's sort of basic. Look at the map first. Think about supply lines and ammunition and how much you have and what the other. So don't they do that anymore? And he said, well, up until colonels, and then maybe one-star generals, kind of a major general, I guess. But then they have a lobotomy, and everything, all their reasoning is taken out, and they're promoted on the basis of political correctness. And of course, Hegseth is doing that to the nth degree. Why did he fire General Donahue, 4-star? Big commander of forces in Europe. I don't know, but my guess is that Donahue went to him and said, look, you got Marines, you got 82nd Airborne in the Persian Gulf area. Forget about it. If you're thinking of putting them into Iran, I quit. So I said, what? Yeah, it's not going to work. You just got to kill a bunch of my people, or our people. Okay, well, I'll take that under advisement. 2 hours later, Donahue was fired. So you have crazy people like this running things, and Larry knows these guys. I mean, he should be a general himself, but of course he wasn't politically correct, particularly on Israel. So, it's really a mess. But just as in Southwest Asia, also in Ukraine, for God's sake, they should have looked at the map, Like, what's next to Ukraine? Oh, that happens to be once called the Soviet Union. Now it's called Russia. Do they have compared? Well, I won't go on any further, but the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians look at all this and say, well, number one, these guys really don't know how to wage war. They don't know about lines of communication and supply. Basic stuff. But the other thing is that they're so reckless that we can't predict what they might be prompted to do. And so we just have to proceed in a measured way. And I dare say that what the Iranians are doing apes, in a sense, what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. We got the upper hand. We're not going to be provoked to doing something that would provoke an irascible, unpredictable move from the likes of the unpredictable master par excellence, our president. What's his name again? Donald Trump.
Yeah. Ray, you've mentioned the case of Lebanon. I think since Lebanon is one of the important parts of the MOU, the first clause in the MOU is about Lebanon. And basically, look at the text. It shows that the text is forcing Israel to withdraw from Lebanon, basically.
That's right.
It says they have to stop attacking, and it's all about withdrawing from Lebanon. And you see the government in Lebanon coming out and make some sort of agreement with Israelis yesterday.
The government, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The government is a fixture of the United States. I play on words. I say president or prime minister Aoun is not his own man.
Mm.
Put in there by the Israelis and the U.S. So any undertaking by him, unless Hezbollah sees enough in it for itself and sees maybe that the Israelis are taking the threat from Hezbollah, which came out of, I know you won't say nowhere, but it's much stronger than any of us thought would happen, but it's going to keep going. So unless these things are taken seriously, um, Iran is going to work its will with its control of the strait, with its ability to resist the worst that the U.S. has to throw at them, a U.S. with a limited number of tomahawks, a limited number of other advanced weaponry, sort of cannibalizing units in South Korea and Japan for Taiwan. I mean, so it has a degree of unreality, but if I were Iranian or Russian or China, I would say, wow, let's just watch how this plays out and see how this dovetails with the upcoming midterm elections in America. I mean, does Trump really not care about those? Well, no, he cares, it turns out. He wants that strait open before there's a worldwide depression. And he can't do that unless he puts the reins on Netanyahu and said, look, Lebanon is over. Don't do Lebanon anymore. You mentioned, Nima, and this really caught my attention, those 15 points or whatever they are, 14, but first one, okay? First one was a paragraph, okay? 2 sentences. One country mentioned 3 times in those 2 sentences. Country, Lebanon. Now, I have been saying that in comparison to those oil-rich sheikhdoms, the Gulfies, who have not shown they cared a whit about what happens to the Palestinians or the Hezbollah or any of those folks. Iran stands out as having kind of, in my view, a principled, almost edifying, kind of altruistic bent on this arc of resistance. People like John Mearsheimer and I can't speak for John, but I saw myself thinking, well, if Iran could get a decent arrangement with the U.S., why would it insist on including Lebanon? For God's sake, why doesn't Iran act like the Gulfies and just say, well, we're really sorry about what's happening in Lebanon, but we'll do that later. Let's make our own new deal. Well, that didn't happen. And I don't know, do I have it wrong? Is this altruism? Is this kind of a mutual solidarity that we're not used to in the West? What do you think?
I think for Iran, Ray, the case of Palestine and the case of Lebanon is a moral issue. It's so much connected with the basis of what has happened in 1979 as the new government comes after the Shah government, the regime before. And it's basically, it seeks some sort of, justice for the whole region. They don't see what's going on in Palestine. The new reports came out just recently show how Israelis were killing kids in Palestine, systematically killing those kids. And this is the reason that Iran is insisting on Lebanon. Lebanon is, Ray, the understanding on the part of Iran is that Lebanon must be the graveyard of greater Israel. That's why they're trapped in Lebanon. You see what they're doing in Lebanon. They're trying to destroy everything. But you see, every time they feel Hezbollah is getting weaker by the assassination, by the attacks, nothing of that sort is happening so far. That's why Iran came out as an outcome of this war. I think the new position of Iran in support of Hezbollah militarily, before that, it was all about logistics. helping Hezbollah the way behind the scene or sending weapons and all of this and that. But right now, they're prepared to militarily support Hezbollah by attacking Israel if something big happens in Lebanon. That's a new sort of move on the part of Iran.
And does it reflect? I'm thinking of when those elections were held, insisted upon by Condoleezza Rice back in 2006 or so, in Gaza, and we're going to win. We're going to win. Of course, Hamas defeated the figurehead authority, Palestinian Authority, hands down. People said, "Well, how did that happen? This violent group?" And I said, "Look, only a tenth of Hamas is violent, and that kind of violence against occupation is legal under international law. But the rest of them are popular because they take care of their people. They have hospitals, and they have food distribution people. And when they won hands down against the Palestinian Authority, and we try to reverse that, of course, by an attempted coup, and it didn't work, okay? Well, that taught me a lesson. That's why Hamas and Hezbollah up there are popular. And apparently that's why Iran cares about them being oppressed and suppressed or obliterated or genocided, right? So what I hear you saying, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, Iran cares a little bit more about human beings than those who commit genocide or enable genocide in places like Gaza. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, my understanding is this, that Iran is not going to back down, Ray. It doesn't matter how the United States try to convince, to push hard against Iran. Because for many years, Ray, they have been using all of these GCC countries around Iran to show how their economy is so good, to show to the Iranian people, look at these GCC countries, how they're living their lives, luxury sort of life. And you're under tremendous sanctions, and the inflation is high because of the government, because of they're not capable. These are huge propaganda machines for such a long time, and they were trying to manipulate the Iranian society. But I think what comes out of the war for Iranian people is that the reality, because they saw how in 40 days of war, UAE is running out of cash. What kind of economy is that? If they're that rich, they're that big, that important, they're not real countries right now, because everything is coming to the surface for the Iranian people. This is the understanding for Iranians, I think. And they know with the attack on Iran, Ray, something is so deep is happening within the Iranian society that let's assume the Israeli agenda. What is the problem with the United States? Iran sees no problem with the United States without Israeli agenda.
Right.
The only problem that Iran sees with Israel, with the United States, is the Israeli agenda. The United States being used in the region as a proxy. This is devastating for many people, because the society is not that much political. The people are living their lives. They don't know that much about what is the agenda. But when they see how Israel was capable to bring the United States into a new war in the Middle East, after experiencing the Iraq war, Afghanistan war, and coming back to the Iranian, and they knew what Iran is or what Iran was before this war started. But they started this war. It was a huge gamble on the part of the United States.
Yeah, and as I quoted Secretary of State Rubio, Israel started it, and so we had to join in. Now, it wasn't a great surprise to Rubio, I'm sure, but for him to explain it in so obvious terms, saying, well, hey, Iran is going to come after us because they know we're joined at the hip with Israel. So we had to go in there so our losses would not be less. Now, there's a better source even, and his name is Joe Kent, okay? Number 2 in the National Intelligence Setup, head of counterterrorism. Now, when he saw the unprovoked attack on Iran, he wrote a nice letter to nice letter to President Trump, whom he had admired in the past, and said, "Mr. President, I have to resign on principle. This attack on Iran was in response to no imminent threat from Iran, and it was all due to the country of Israel and its supporters in the United States, period." End quote. My God, here's a guy that not only resigns on principle, but spells out in one sentence why he resigned. Was he informed? Nobody better informed than the head of counterterrorism right under Tulsi Gabbard. So people can see what's going on to the degree it's reflected in our press. And all I'm trying to say here is that, yeah, the Iranians know that too. And there seems to be an unusual dosage of humanity, if you will, empathy, uh, sympathy for people who are oppressed, just as the Iranians were oppressed. 1979, forget about it. 1953, that's where it starts. And just to remind people, and your viewers probably don't need to be reminded, but that's when Mossadegh, the only popularly elected in a democratic procedure prime minister of Iran, he was elected a couple of years, like at 51, 52. And then he looked around and said, "Oh my God, why are we giving the British 90% of our revenue from the oil under our soil? Let's talk about that." And then it became, oh, let's nationalize that. So our people, our Iranian people, can have some of the and develop. And the British MI6 took the fledgling CIA, what, 47, 6 years old, and said, "Hey, fellas, this is what you do when an upstart like this guy Mossadegh in Iran thinks that the oil under his soil belongs to him." And you know the rest of it, okay? That's where it started. And when the Shah, cruel as he was, with a Savak thing that was just as bad as the Gestapo, when he got sick, remember he got sick 70, 78, 79. Jimmy Carter, out of the goodness of his heart, lets him come to the United States. Now, what does a normal Iranian think about that? Oh my God. He may die, he may be sick, but they're going to hatch up some other guy to take his place, right? And so now I don't condone taking over embassies, but that's why they went in there. They knew the records would show what happened in 53, and they wanted to show the rest of the people what was likely to happen if the Shah was able to work his will on that American administration. So this is just why we're saying that too is in the craw of many Iranians. I mean, I was just getting out of elementary school in 1953, but I remember it. I mean, I remember seeing it in Time magazine. Here's Mossadegh, Man of the Year in Time magazine, just for 1 year, right? Then he got rid of him. So that's the background here. Please don't talk about, not talking to you, but don't start with 79, for God's sake. Start with 1953. And when I served in the CIA, I developed some friends who it would pretty much reformed their outlook on the world, but they were actually involved in Project Ajax. Okay, that's what they call this thing where they overthrew Mossadegh, and they were also involved in other things. But I don't want to monopolize conversation here, which I've already done.
Yeah. Ray, I think one of the other fronts that is important right now is the case of Ukraine. And Ukraine is using drones against Russia. And those drones are produced in Ukraine, in the United Kingdom, and other European countries as well. And they don't want to back down. You see even Mark Rutte coming to the United States talking. He's literally becoming a puppet of Donald Trump and trying to advertise how great Donald Trump has been so far, and he's doing great. And Donald Trump coming out and saying in response to his sort of propaganda, saying that Zelensky is just doing well, and let's see what Zelensky is trying to achieve. What is the understanding of the Trump administration with the case of Ukraine? Is that a priority for Washington, or Russia has to find some other solution for the war that they're in?
This is kind of a circus. It's to deflect attention from the fact that Russia is going to win this battle on the ground where it counts by the end of the year. These are pinpricks. Just a little history here. When Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the historian, was asked to do a little task for John F. Kennedy about intelligence, he came up with one really, really shocking revelation, and that is that 80% of the information that intelligence analysts have to work with on the Soviet Union at the time comes from open sources. It's called media analysis. No spies? No spies. Some spies? Yeah, but marginal influence. Technical means, it can help. It can confirm what has already been said by the Kremlin. Now, that was 1962, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Or no, 1961, right after the Bay of Pigs. Okay, so fast forward to when Ronald Reagan came in 1980-81, about 20 years later, and Bill Casey, the head of the CIA, at the first cabinet meeting, a friend of mine was there and took notes. Okay, he said, I found out when I came in here that the analysts don't depend on spies. 80%, same figure, 80% of the material is in open sources. So there's something called media analysis, and what the Russians say counts. And when they differ and when they try to explain. So I'm going to give you a couple of for instances. That's what we say in the Bronx. I'll give you a for instance, okay? So here's Sakharova, just 2 days ago. She's asked about all this stuff, about all these drone strikes, and she says, well, the West is spreading tales about imminent victory, and they want to convince their allies that this is within reach. And so Kiev is pursuing a single objective, which is, get this, which is to provoke us into going up the escalation ladder to secure additional tranches of Western military financial aid, which will inevitably be torn apart by the piranhas, by the piranhas in the Kiev government that will steal the money, stuff it into their own pockets, and then ask NATO and EU countries to try to get into a direct confrontation with Russia. Now, there's a lot of speculation, even by respectable Russian analysts like Dmitry Trinin, that we can't let this continue this way. We have to. We've named some of the factories and some of the military installations in Europe that are helping the Ukrainians do this stuff. We might have to hit them, and so the question is, would Russia retaliate by hitting territory within a member of NATO? And that's the big question, even if it's just conventional, like Oreshniks, would they do it? And most of my colleagues say, I'd probably be forced. The public sentiment is so, well, I say no. I say that my vision of Putin confronting these kinds of questions is saying Lavrov and Ushakov and all the people who said, well, what do you think if we, for example, and we've warned them not to do this, but let's say the Latvians let the Ukrainians use one of these bases that have been prepared for them to use for said drones. What are we going to do if they do that? Don't we have to retaliate on Latvia? And the answer has been no.